This is PIX on Politics Daily with Dan Mannarino.
Hey there, I'm Henry Rosoff. Welcome to PIX on Politics Daily. A lot happening right now, both in the Vatican and in New York City. We have a new pope, so congratulations to the 1.4 billion of you of the Catholic faith out there. In New York City politics, we of course got the race for mayor. We are even starting to hear some stuff about the race for New York governor next year, the race for New Jersey governor this year. And amidst all of that, I like to talk about policy. I mean, don't you? That's what matters to all of us on a daily basis. And one of the big pieces of policy that is going to be implemented very soon, thanks to the New York State budget, is a change to the way people who are in severe mental health distress on the streets and subways are approached. Let's bring in the mayor's senior advisor on mental health, Brian Stettin. He's going to help us break down some changes to the involuntary commitment statute that was just passed out of Albany. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Henry. Great to be with you.
So, Brian, break down these changes. We've been talking about this for a while, to be frank. I think a lot of people at home are going to be familiar with this, but remind everyone, what are the changes? Why were they necessary?
Sure. So I should say this is really a culmination of efforts that we've been making in the mayor's office really since Mayor Adams took office in 2022, where we have really tried to instill a culture change to the mental health system in New York City. So often in the past, we have missed opportunities to help people in severe psychiatric crisis who we encounter in our subways and other public spaces, not because folks who are doing outreach to them didn't want to help them, but because of a misunderstanding of the law, a belief that we could only intervene involuntarily. That is, when someone is refusing treatment and doesn't recognize their own need for it, bring them to a hospital for an evaluation and potentially admit them for care against their will in situations where we found the person dangerous to themselves or others. That is, as the law was previously understood, a person was violent or suicidal or engaging in some outrageously dangerous conduct. And that narrow understanding of the law left out the possibility that we could help somebody who is dangerous to themselves simply because they're not meeting their basic human needs. And so they're kind of slowly self-destructing. And this is something we all see on a very regular basis as New Yorkers. The fact is, the law that we have had for decades doesn't preclude us helping those individuals. It's just that it was too vague. So we've been, as a matter of strategy, just doing that, having a more broad understanding of the law and actually helping lots of people and really seeing some remarkable transformations. The problem is, because of the widespread misunderstanding of the law, sometimes folks we had brought to the hospital had been discharged too soon, or judges had been releasing them, even though they were still, in our view, dangerous to themselves or others. So the main thing that was achieved through this legislation is to make it crystal clear in the statute itself, that is the words that people look to for guidance, that danger to self includes the person who is not meeting their basic human needs as a result of their mental illness, that food, clothing, shelter, medical care that they aren't getting because their mental illness is standing in the way. There is now going to be no doubt that these are people we can help, and we're going to have more success in retaining them in the hospital longer.
And there's also some changes in the way that if someone maybe is on a path to recovery, is released, seems to be sliding again, it will be less of an ordeal to bring them back in. But I want to get to address the concern, because there was no amount of criticism and conjecture over this. It did, in fact, take years to achieve this change. And it's because people thought there was the risk of this going too far. You holding people unnecessarily or who were not actually suffering from severe mental health crisis. I had asked you about this the other day when you kind of announced this change with the mayor. What are the checks in place to make sure this doesn't get abused?
Yeah, no, it's an important question, and I think viewers should know that nothing in these changes interfere with the very important due process protections that have always been built into this system, because there's no question there is some deprivation of liberty involved in holding someone in a hospital who doesn't want to be there. It's not something we do lightly, and a person should not be subject to that unless there is an actual medical need for them to receive the care. So one thing that has remained true in the law is that it's not simply about a person's failure to meet their basic needs. This is not something that's going to be used against someone who's just experiencing challenges because of poverty. There is also another box that has to be checked where we've got to have a mental illness there, right? We've got to see the appearance of mental illness symptoms in the community to bring that person to the hospital. And then a doctor's actually got to diagnose them with that mental illness, in addition to finding them a danger to themselves or others, in order to admit them to the hospital. As for the due process protections built in, once a decision is made to admit somebody to a hospital, and again, this is longstanding law that hasn't been altered here at all, they are assigned an attorney through the Mental Hygiene Legal Service, which is a state-funded organization, and they have an immediate right to challenge that decision in court, which means we're then going to go before a judge where there's a very high burden of proof on the hospital to establish that this person, in fact, has a mental illness and is a danger to themselves or others. And even if they don't exercise that right to challenge that decision, if we hold them for up to 30 days, on that 30th day, there's an automatic hearing that takes place, as well as periodic check-ins with the court that continue to be part of this process. So we're absolutely making sure that in no case are we ever going to use this against someone who is not in very significant need of it.
Let's talk about implementation, because you guys are obviously going to get out there as soon as possible and try and reach and help some of these people that you have not been able to reach before because of everything we've been talking about. But it's well known there are just not enough psychiatric beds. I know the mayor and your administration are working on this problem. But what comes next? Can you handle this new batch of people that you're trying to reach from a capacity standpoint?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that most of the people who are going to come to the hospital, and really this is something happening now. This is not some new authority that's going to be triggered by this law, right? This is just a clarification that confirms that the policy we've had in place since 2022 is correct and lawful. So, I don't have to speculate on it. I can tell you from actual experience and what's happening that many of the people who are coming to the hospital through this broader understanding, the truth is they were going to wind up in the hospital at some point anyway. Had we walked away from them when we saw them failing to meet their basic needs, as we did for so long prior to this policy, eventually the person decompensates to the point, in many cases, where they're behaving in a way that brings them to the hospital. Of course, at that point, they're more acutely ill. And sometimes it's that they've hurt somebody or hurt themselves. They might have committed a criminal act that has them now in the criminal justice system, which is much harder to extricate them from. And they come to the hospital under what's called a forensic commitment, basically just to restore them to competency so that they can be put on trial. So I actually think that the additional number of people that will come to the hospital through this policy is modest and small. We actually have not found that it has overburdened our city-run hospitals to have this policy in place. Mostly it's about getting people care earlier, ideally when they're less acutely ill, to where we can maybe even get them out a little bit sooner, connect them with the services they need to thrive in the community. And if we do this right, and I'm encouraged by the early signs we're seeing, I think at the end of the day, we're going to be talking for most people about less time spent over a lifetime in the hospital rather than more.
So it's all interconnected. What we hear about not having some of the long-term psychological beds, can be solved by reaching many of these people earlier. I mean, that I get it. That's just kind of common sense. We're wrapping up here. We just got another minute or so. Is there anything else you want to add? I know there were a couple of more subtle changes. I touched upon one of them already. I know there were some things you didn't get, actually. Maybe touch upon that. What mission lies ahead as far as getting changes implemented?
Sure. And I'll say that these changes originated in a piece of legislation that we in the mayor's office put forth back in 2023 called the Supportive Interventions Act. And we're super grateful to the governor for picking up a number of pieces of it and making it part of her executive budget, which is why we're having this happy conversation today about some really good things that have been accomplished. And of course, we've been kind of doggedly pursuing this through our lobbying efforts in Albany for all this time. And it's to some extent paid off. But as you mentioned, there are some big things that we're still hoping to pursue in the future. There's some unfinished business here legislatively. Just to mention two of them quickly. One of them is to make it clear that when a person is experiencing harm to their brain, right, psychiatric harm, as a result of their mental illness, and they're unable to recognize their need for treatment, really, that alone ought to be grounds for holding somebody in a hospital. It shouldn't necessarily be tied to a risk of physical harm, because what that requirement does is force us to wait until somebody is homeless and in deplorable physical condition. If we could actually hospitalize people longer when we encounter them on our first psychotic break, maybe when they're still connected to family and haven't burned all those bridges and still have a roof over their head, we can avoid a lot of people falling into those tragic circumstances. Another key thing is about our assisted outpatient treatment, or Kendra's Law program, which is when people come out of the hospital, we connect them under a court order to treatment to make sure that we can monitor them closely. It's a remarkably effective program, but there are many people who meet the criteria for it, who are stuck in this revolving door of the mental health system, who don't get into the program because hospitals don't always screen properly. So we want to make sure that we're identifying everybody who is eligible for this kind of intervention. And so we had a piece in our bill that we're going to continue to fight for in future years to make it routine practice when you bring someone into a hospital as an inpatient, to screen them for eligibility for Kendra's Law so that we can get them into that program on their way out the hospital door.
Brian, not the last we're hearing of this. Very interested to have you back a couple months down the line to see if there's some data or some initial data that shows that there's a dent in this. But for now, we'll leave it here, and I want to thank you for joining us.
For sure. Thanks so much, Henry.
And that'll do it for this edition of PIX on Politics Daily. Of course, we have the big show tonight, PIX on Politics, with my colleague Dan Mannarino. He's getting ready for it right now. You can catch that at 6:30, and then that has a re-air on Sunday morning. But for now, I'm Henry Rosoff, wishing you a good day.